The stagecoach crawled across the winter plains like a tired animal searching for shelter, its wheels crunching over frost-bitten earth as if cracking old memories under its weight. Inside, Eleanor Whitlock sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, the lace of her white wedding dress trembling each time the coach jolted over a buried stone. She watched the horizon through the small window, the world stretched in pale shades of blue and silver, as if painted by a lonely hand. Her breath fogged the glass, fading quickly, the way hope fades when held too close to fear. She had traveled 3 weeks across shifting landscapes to reach this final stretch, guided by a letter promising companionship in exchange for gentleness and steady company. Her white hair gleamed beneath her bonnet, a soft silver crown earned through storms both lived and survived. Eleanor was 65, and though her bones felt the weight of years, her heart still carried one stubborn bloom, the wish to be wanted for something more than usefulness. She whispered to herself that winter was only cold when one walked it alone, and perhaps this journey would end that ache. The coach finally creaked to a stop before the edge of Silver Bend, a small frontier town pressed against a ridge of snow-dusted hills. Eleanor stepped out carefully, her boot sinking slightly into the powder, her dress catching the faintest shimmer of ice. People paused in their routines to look at her, some curious, some confused, some wearing the kind of pity that cut sharper than judgment. A woman in a wool shawl nudged her companion, murmuring something Eleanor couldn't hear but felt in her bones all the same. She did not fit what they imagined a bride should be. Martha June, the boarding-house owner, hurried down the wooden steps, her cheeks pink from the cold. She wrapped a thick shawl around Eleanor's shoulders without asking permission, a gesture that felt like sunlight in a frozen landscape. Eleanor thanked her softly, relief rising like warmth under her ribs. Martha spoke with the ease of someone who made strangers feel like kin, guiding Eleanor toward the large double doors. Inside, lamplight flickered against the walls, creating a gentle glow that eased the tension from Eleanor's spine. She set her small bag beside the bed Martha prepared. The room smelled faintly of pine and old quilts. Eleanor smoothed her dress, steadying her breath, and allowed herself to imagine the man she had come to marry. Harold Branton had written in careful penmanship, describing his ranch, his need for a thoughtful companion, his desire for peace after years of misfortune. She clung to those words now, believing they would offer a safe harbor from her long season of loneliness. She whispered a quiet prayer that he would see beyond the years etched into her skin. A knock came just as the sun dipped behind the hills, washing the sky in smoky lavender. Eleanor expected Harold, but found a lanky stable boy instead. Jesse, bright-eyed despite the cold, grinned shyly as he helped carry her luggage inside. He spoke of the town's endless gossip, the winter storms, and the strange quiet that settled over Silver Bend at dusk. Then he mentioned almost casually the giant Apache who sometimes helped around the outskirts, strong as an ox, quiet as a shadow. Eleanor listened politely, filing the detail away without much thought, more preoccupied with rehearsing the greeting she planned for Harold. When Harold finally arrived the next morning, his boots tracked snow across the boarding-house floor. He stared at Eleanor as though she were a riddle he hadn't studied for. His jaw tightened, and the silence stretched so long she felt the edges of her hope begin to crack. Martha stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression darkening. Harold kept looking from Eleanor to the door, as though searching for an escape. Eleanor lifted her chin, willing her voice to remain calm if he spoke something foolish. She prayed he wouldn't. But he did. In a clipped, embarrassed tone, Harold muttered that she was older than expected, frielier than the letters suggested, and not suited for ranch work or the expectations of a partnership he'd envisioned. Eleanor felt the words strike her like wind against bare skin. She had known rejection before, but something in his voice, its impatience, its insult, made her feel as if winter had climbed into her chest. She managed a steady nod, refusing to let her eyes betray her, though a small part of her wilted. Harold left without offering his hand, his apology, or even a respectful farewell. The room grew quiet, save for the faint hiss of wind squeezing through window cracks. Martha touched Eleanor's shoulder, urging her to rest, but Eleanor moved to the window instead. She watched Harold's figure disappear down the street, each step shrinking him, until he became just another man who could not see beyond the surface. Eleanor pressed her palm to the glass, reminding herself she had survived worse seasons. Still, humiliation settled over her like frost, thin but numbing. That afternoon, Eleanor attempted to gather her belongings, intending to leave before more gossip bloomed. The weight of others' stares frightened her almost more than the thought of traveling alone. As she stepped outside with her small suitcase, she expected to find Martha or Jessie waiting. Instead, a towering figure emerged from the pale light, snow swirling around him like a restless halo. He was shirtless despite the cold, broad-shouldered, his skin warm bronze against the winter air. His black hair brushed his shoulders, and his dark eyes held a depth she could not name. He lifted her suitcase with a gentleness that startled her, bowing his head slightly as though greeting a queen rather than a rejected bride. Eleanor stood rooted in place, the cold forgotten. The giant Apache said nothing, yet the silence around him felt protective rather than empty. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she sensed the faintest stir of safety. Something in his gaze, steady and unhurried, made her wonder whether winter had carried her here not to be broken, but to be seen. And as he turned, motioning softly for her to follow, Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her, as though the story she thought she came to live had cracked open to reveal a different path. One she had not imagined, yet suddenly could not walk away from. Snow drifted through Silver Bend like a slow, silent confession, settling on rooftops, fence posts, and the trembling edges of Eleanor Whitlock's white wedding dress. She stood beside the boarding house steps while the giant Apache, this quiet stranger who had appeared with the same certainty as sunrise, set her small suitcase gently on the porch. The cold nipped at her cheeks, but the stranger's presence felt like a shield against the wind's cruelty. He did not speak, yet his silence carried a strange, steady warmth, as if he had already decided she was worth standing near. Inside, Martha June hovered protectively, her brows furrowed at the sight of Eleanor's trembling hands. She ushered her back into the parlor with a firmness that tolerated no argument. The fire crackled softly, a defiant heartbeat against the winter outside. Eleanor sat in the same chair she had occupied earlier, only now the world pressed heavier on her shoulders. She stared at the dancing flames, remembering Harold Branton's cold dismissal as clearly as if he were still beside her. Too old. Too fragile. Not what he expected. Each phrase clung to her like frost. She had carried hope across states and seasons, cradling it gently like something that might bloom again. Yet hope, she now realized, bruised easily when exposed to careless hands. Jessie darted around the parlor, attempting to brew tea though he clattered every tin and cup within reach. He glanced at her with wide, sympathetic eyes, unsure how to comfort a woman so refined and wounded. Martha eventually relieved him of his duties, placing a steaming cup between Eleanor's palms. The warmth seeped slowly into her fingers, grounding her. She murmured a thank you, but her voice felt thin, as though spoken from far away. Outside, Harold's departure echoed through the town like a rumor carried on wind. Silver Bend was small enough that every shuttered window hid a pair of curious eyes. Eleanor sensed their whispers gathering strength like drifting snowflakes, each one light on its own yet devastating when they amassed. She had survived a long life, but public humiliation possessed a unique sting, sharp, lingering, and deeply personal. She rose from the chair, compelled by the need for air rather than escape. Her steps carried her toward the doorway, though the winter wind slapped harshly against her cheeks the moment she crossed the threshold. She tightened Martha's shawl around her shoulders and glanced toward the main road. A handful of townsfolk lingered beneath the awning of the mercantile, pretending to discuss flower prices while staring openly in her direction. Among them stood two women, widows known for their relentless commentary. They clutched their coats tighter, shifting their weight as Eleanor passed. One whispered something that made the other smirk, and though their words were lost beneath the wind, Eleanor understood the gist. She walked with dignity, refusing to let her pace falter, even as the sting of their mockery prickled beneath her skin. She reached the well at the center of town, its surface glazed with ice. The wooden structure creaked faintly, and she felt strangely mirrored by it, worn, weathered, but still standing. Eleanor closed her eyes, letting the cold settle her swirling thoughts. She had come here for a quiet life, not a dramatic unveiling of her perceived shortcomings. She longed for a place where age was seen as a harvest of wisdom, rather than a reason for dismissal. The sound of boots crunching snow approached from behind. She opened her eyes, expecting Martha or perhaps Jessie, but instead she found Tawa, the towering Apache, standing a few feet away. His breath rose in soft plumes, his skin ruddy from the cold, though he gave no sign of discomfort. Eleanor felt a ripple of unease, not from fear but from the unfamiliar intensity of his presence. He was like a mountain, silent, immense, impossible to ignore. He inclined his head, a gesture both respectful and gentle. She returned the nod, though confusion stirred within her. Why had he followed? Why did he care? She wished the answers were simple, but nothing in her life had been simple for a very long time. He lifted a hand, not quite reaching for her, but offering his arm in silent assistance. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His skin was warm despite the winter air. Together they walked back toward the boarding house, their steps slow, steady, and strangely synchronized. Eleanor found herself studying the way he carried himself, calm, confident, as if rooted to something deeper than pride or vanity. When they entered the parlor again, Martha looked relieved. Tawa set Eleanor's suitcase beside the door, nodding once before stepping back into the snow. She watched him leave with a bewildering mixture of gratitude and curiosity. His silhouette cut through the drifting white, broad shoulders haloed by falling flakes until the door closed and he vanished from sight. Eleanor settled back into the parlor seat, her thoughts shifting like restless embers. Perhaps Harold's rejection, painful as it felt, had opened a door she had not known existed. She wasn't ready to walk through it yet, but its presence stirred something small and tender within her, a sensation she had believed was lost to age. The rest of the afternoon unfolded slowly. The town seemed quieter after the incident, as though holding its breath. Even the wind softened around the boarding house, brushing against the windows like a cautious visitor. Martha told Eleanor she could stay as long as she needed. Jessie offered to mend her broken trunk latch, eager to be useful. Their kindness, though simple, soaked into her heart like warmth returning to fingers that had been numb too long. But as evening settled over Silver Bend, drifting into shades of purple and ink, Eleanor found that sleep would not come. She sat by the window, watching the street lamps flicker to life, their warm halos glowing against the snow-packed road. Every so often, a figure passed by, bundled in coats or scarves, heads bowed against the cold. She wondered whether they pitied her, judged her, or simply existed within their own worries, leaving room for neither cruelty nor compassion. She was adjusting the shawl around her shoulders when a familiar form approached through the dusk. Her breath caught softly. Tawa stood across the street, framed by drifting snow and the gentle glow of lantern light. He carried a stack of firewood against his chest, though he made no move toward the boarding house door. Instead, he simply stood there a moment, scanning the quiet street as though ensuring its safety. She realized, with a slow dawning clarity, that he was watching over the place, not from obligation but from choice. Something inside her shifted, subtle yet undeniable, like the first crack of ice signaling the promise of spring beneath winter's weight. He deposited the firewood neatly by the boarding house side door before turning to leave. But before he disappeared, he paused, looking up toward her window. Their eyes met, hers unsure, his unwavering. No words passed between them, yet the moment carried a strange electricity, delicate but powerful, as though fate had brushed past them with deliberate intent. When he finally walked away, Eleanor remained at the window, breath fogging the glass. She sensed that her story in Silver Bend was no longer confined to Harold's rejection. Something larger, unexpected, and quietly profound was unfolding. She felt it settling into her bones, warm and frightening all at once. And as the lanterns flickered in the deepening night, Eleanor realized with a tremor that her journey's harsh beginning might not be the ending she had feared, but the opening chapter of something that could thaw even the deepest winter. Morning seeped into Silver Bend through a veil of pale winter light, brushing against the boarding house windows like a hesitant hand. Eleanor woke before the sun fully rose, her breath forming faint clouds in the cool air, her heart carrying the residue of yesterday's wounds. She wrapped herself in the shawl Martha lent her, and stepped into the quiet hallway, feeling the creak of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet, as though the house itself were offering comfort. The scent of pine smoke drifted upward from the kitchen hearth, inviting her toward warmth she wasn't sure she deserved. Martha stood over the stove stirring porridge, humming softly between sips of black coffee. She welcomed Eleanor with a gentle smile that soothed more than it startled. Eleanor took a seat by the fire, letting the flames color her thoughts with flickers of gold, rather than the cold gray memories Harold had left behind. Outside, wind brushed against the building in slow, sweeping strokes, not angry today, but thoughtful, almost contemplative. Eleanor traced her fingers along the rim of her cup, absorbing each breath of warmth as if storing courage grain by grain. A sudden thud outside broke the morning's hush. Martha glanced toward the window, then stepped aside to let Eleanor look. There, splitting logs with slow, deliberate strength, was the same giant Apache who had appeared the night before like some quiet guardian sculpted from dusk and snowfall. His movements were sure and steady, each swing of the axe a rhythm older than the town around him. Steam curled from his skin in the winter air, a testament to the fire blazing within him. Eleanor felt her breath catch, not in fear but in something gentler, something that softened the ache inside her. She carried her bowl to the window, watching as he gathered the chopped wood into a neat pile. Martha joined her, whispering that he sometimes helped around town when storms threatened the weaker homes. No one paid him wages, but he accepted dried meat, blankets, or coffee without complaint. Eleanor asked his name quietly, afraid the sound of her voice might travel through the glass and disturb him. Martha told her he was called Tawa by his people, though most simply referred to him as the silent man who worked where he was needed, always arriving at the right moment without being asked. When Tawa finished stacking the wood, he turned toward the boarding house as though sensing their eyes on him. Eleanor instinctively stepped back, but not before his gaze swept upward and settled on the window. His expression did not change, yet something in his eyes, dark, still, unwavering, felt like an acknowledgement, a steadying presence she had not expected to encounter in her unraveling world. Eleanor found herself wondering what he saw. A woman past her prime, or someone still capable of warmth, still deserving of being noticed. Later in the morning, Eleanor stepped outside to offer her thanks. She found him loading another armful of firewood near the porch. When she spoke, her voice trembled despite her effort to sound composed. Tawa turned toward her with a calmness that felt like an anchor in turbulent water. He nodded once, accepting her gratitude without diminishing it, and gestured toward the stacked logs as though telling her she was safe for another night. She felt her cheeks warm against the cold, moved by his wordless reassurance. He noticed her shivering and picked up a smaller log, handing it to her, so she could feel the lingering heat from the split wood. She cradled it, astonished at how something freshly opened could hold so much warmth. Their fingers brushed, and though the contact lasted an instant, it left a quiet resonance inside her, as if a forgotten door had creaked open. She thanked him once more, the words coming out steadier this time, carried not by politeness but sincerity. Throughout the day, townsfolk drifted in and out of the mercantile, casting glances at Eleanor whenever she passed. Whispers rose like thin smoke behind her, but she found they stung less now, as though Tawa's presence had tempered their bite. Jesse accompanied her to buy lamp oil, proudly carrying her basket, and glaring at anyone who stared too long. He asked her whether she planned to stay in Silver Bend. She hesitated, considering the fragile hope stirring beneath her ribs. Before she could answer, a gust of wind announced another flurry of snow, sending both of them hurrying inside. By late afternoon, clouds gathered thickly, promising another night of fierce cold. Eleanor returned to the boarding house, only to find Tawa inside the yard repairing a loose shutter. She approached quietly, uncertain whether he wanted company. He paused his work when she neared, studying her with an expression that held neither pity nor curiosity, only a gentle patience. She told him Harold had rejected her. The words slipped out unexpectedly, carried by a need to release the heaviness inside her. Tawa listened, standing still as if the world had commanded him to hold space for her grief. She spoke of the journey, of the letter that promised companionship, and of the humiliation that wrapped itself around her like an unwelcome cloak. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer false comfort or rushed assurances. Instead, he reached for a piece of firewood, brushing it softly with his thumb before handing it to her. His gesture was simple, but in his eyes she saw the meaning. She was stronger than the storm that had tried to break her. She held the wood against her chest, feeling its warmth seep into her palms, melting a small corner of the frost inside her heart. As twilight fell, he finished the shutter and stepped back, examining his work with satisfaction. Eleanor thanked him again, her voice quiet but steadier than before. She sensed a shift within herself, not dramatic but profound. An ember catching, refusing to die. The sky deepened into shades of violet and blue, stars beginning to tremble into existence. Tawa walked toward the gate, but before he left, he glanced back at her. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, fragile as breath yet impossible to ignore. Eleanor returned to her room, feeling both lighter and strangely unsettled. She placed the piece of firewood on her bedside table, its warmth fading slowly, but its meaning lingering. She wrapped herself in her shawl and gazed out the window, watching the snowflakes drift past like quiet secrets falling from the heavens. Then she caught sight of something that made her heart still. Tawa standing near the edge of the street, looking toward the boarding house once more. He turned away a moment later, disappearing into the settling dusk, but the message was unmistakable. The winter she thought would swallow her had awakened a fire she never expected to feel again. The storm announced itself before the first snowflake fell, murmuring through the distant pines like a warning carried from another world. Eleanor heard it while sweeping the boarding house hallway, a low, trembling growl tucked into the wind's breath. She paused beside the window, watching clouds gather over the mountains, thick, restless, bruised with an approaching fury. Winter storms in Silver Bend were peculiar. They arrived with the weight of old stories, cracking open the sky as though releasing something long kept secret. Martha hurried through the kitchen, shutting shutters and tucking blankets beneath the doors. Jesse ran from room to room collecting candles, his excitement tinged with nervous energy. Eleanor helped where she could, though her fingers were slower than they once were. Every now and then, she glanced outside, searching for a familiar silhouette. Tawa had not appeared since early morning, when he brought wood and left without a word, though his steady gaze lingered in her memory like the last embers of a fading fire. By afternoon, the sky darkened unnaturally. Snow swept in sideways, carried by a wind that howled like a creature prowling the edges of town. Lamps flickered. Horses whinnied in the stables. Martha insisted they stay inside until the storm settled, but Eleanor's heart beat with an unease she could not ignore. Something pulled her toward the window, as if some unseen thread tied her fate to the world outside. Late in the day, a gust slammed against the boarding house so fiercely the walls shuddered. Eleanor gasped, dropping the shawl she was folding. Martha sent Jesse to secure the back shed, then turned to Eleanor with worry creasing her brow. The older woman reassured her she was fine, though her voice betrayed the tremor beneath her calm. Wanting to help, Eleanor ventured out to bring in a forgotten crate of potatoes near the back steps. The wind struck like a living force, pushing her sideways, tearing the breath from her chest. Snowflakes hit her skin like shards. She leaned down to lift the crate, but her boot skidded on a thin glaze of ice forming beneath the drifting snow. Her foot slipped, then her balance gave way entirely. The crate toppled, rolling across the porch, potatoes scattering like marbles on a frozen floor. Eleanor fell hard, a sharp ache bursting through her ankle. For a moment, the storm swallowed all sound, replacing it with the pounding rhythm of her own heartbeat. She struggled to rise, gripping the porch railing, but pain shot up her leg, forcing her back down. Snow gathered quickly on her shoulders, clinging to her dress, her hair, her trembling hands. Then a shadow cut through the storm, large, deliberate, unmistakable. Tawa emerged from the whiteness as though he had stepped out of the storm's chest, his towering frame breaking the wind's fury around him. Snow clung to his hair, to the bare skin of his arms, yet he moved with calm purpose, unaffected by the cold that gnawed at everything else. He knelt beside her, his presence a warm stillness amid the raging storm. Eleanor tried to speak, but the cold stole her voice. Tawa slid one arm beneath her knees and another around her back, lifting her with a gentleness that contradicted his strength. She clung to his shoulder instinctively, feeling the steady beat of his breath against her cheek. The storm roared around them, yet for a moment it seemed to break upon him like waves against stone. Inside, Martha rushed forward as he carried Eleanor through the doorway, his movements careful but firm. Jesse followed, wide-eyed, slamming the door shut against the wind. Tawa lowered Eleanor onto a chair by the fire, his hands lingering long enough to ensure she was steady. Martha examined the ankle, muttering curses about winter storms and foolish chores, though concern overshadowed irritation. Eleanor tried to apologize, but Tawa shook his head once, silencing her without a word. He knelt on one knee before her, holding her ankle with astonishing gentleness. His fingers were warm, his touch steady. Eleanor's breath caught when their eyes met, her own glistening with pain, his dark and unreadable, yet filled with an unspoken tenderness that softened the storm's echo inside her. Martha handed him a strip of cloth to wrap the ankle, and he worked with practiced care. Eleanor felt the world shrink to the warmth of the fire, the pressure of his hands, the fragile safety surrounding them. The storm might have shattered everything beyond the walls, but here, within this small, flickering circle of light, she felt sheltered in a way she had not felt in years. When he finished, Tawa rose slowly, but he remained near her, as though unwilling to step away until he was certain she was safe. Eleanor's voice finally returned, a soft whisper thanking him. He bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her gratitude without diminishing it. Night settled over Silver Bend like a heavy blanket. The storm grew worse, battering the shutters and rattling the beams, testing every seam of the fragile building. Jessie and Martha retreated to their rooms, exhausted from preparations. Eleanor tried to rest as well, but sleep drifted just out of reach. Pain pulsed through her ankle, but something deeper kept her awake, a tremor in her chest that had nothing to do with injury. She rose carefully, using the wall for balance, and returned to the window overlooking the street. The storm's fury had swallowed the world, erasing everything beyond a swirling curtain of white. She felt small against the vastness of it, yet strangely unafraid. The fire behind her warmed her back, reminding her she was not alone. A sudden movement caught her eye, something dark amid the white. She pressed closer to the glass, breath fogging the pain. There, near the hitching post, stood Tawa once more, snow whipping around him in wild spirals. He scanned the street with a protective vigilance, as though expecting some threat hidden within the storm. Eleanor's hand lifted toward the window, her fingers trembling not from cold, but from something far more vulnerable. What was he guarding? The town? The boarding house? Her? She had never been the center of anyone's worry. Not truly. And yet he stood there, grounding the storm with his presence, defying the night's violence with nothing more than the quiet strength of his body and spirit. Minutes passed, perhaps longer. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his head toward her window. Their eyes met through the storm, through the glass, through the distance carved by their lives. The connection lasted only a heartbeat, but it settled into her chest deeply, leaving a warmth that defied the winter outside. Suddenly another gust struck the house, powerful enough to rattle the frame. Eleanor flinched, gripping the windowsill. When she looked back, Tawa was striding toward the porch, urgency sharpening his steps. She hobbled back toward the living room just as he entered, snow clinging to him like shards of frozen light. He spoke his first words to her, low and steady, his voice shaped by both caution and certainty. "Stay close to the fire." The storm surged against the walls again, louder this time, almost furious. And though he said nothing more, Eleanor understood the truth layered beneath his simple instruction. Danger was gathering, but she was not facing it alone. The storm finally loosened its grip on Silver Bend by dawn, leaving the world washed in white silence, as if night had emptied its sorrow across the land and retreated without apology. Eleanor woke with a dull ache in her ankle, but a sharper ache in her chest, the memory of Tawa's voice echoing through her as clearly as the wind that had shaken the walls. She dressed slowly, leaning on the bedpost for balance, aware that the quiet following a fierce night often revealed truths people avoided when the world was louder. Downstairs, Martha brewed strong coffee, her movements sharp with leftover worry, though relief softened her features when Eleanor appeared. Jessie chattered about broken fences and drifting snow, but his voice dimmed when the door opened and Tawa stepped inside, carrying an armful of firewood he had gathered before sunrise. Snow dusted his shoulders like pale ash, yet his eyes held the calm steadiness of someone who had walked through storms long before last night's fury. Eleanor felt a strange flutter beneath her ribs, gratitude mingled with something deeper, something she had not dared to name. He set the wood by the hearth, his gaze flicking briefly to her wrapped ankle. Without asking, he knelt to check the bandages, his touch gentle, his brow furrowing with a concern that warmed her more than the fire. She told him she would be fine, though her voice wavered, and he looked up at her with a softness that unraveled something carefully guarded inside her. Before either could speak further, the front door banged open, letting in Harold Branton, red-faced, coat dusted with snow, indignation pouring off him like heat. His eyes locked on Eleanor with a mix of guilt and stubborn pride, and the room seemed to tighten around his presence. Harold strode forward as though reclaiming something he believed still belonged to him. He greeted no one, not even Martha, whose glare sharpened enough to slice through his arrogance. He spoke Eleanor's name with a strained cordiality that fooled no one, especially not Tawa, who rose silently to his full height, positioning himself just close enough to remind Harold he was no longer the only force in the room. Harold's voice wavered as he claimed he had acted hastily the previous day, that the storm had given him time to reconsider, that a man of his responsibilities needed companionship after all. His words tasted of pride, not remorse. Eleanor felt her spine stiffen, memories of his dismissal striking her like cold rain. She opened her mouth to answer, but Harold pressed on, insisting she prepare to leave with him immediately, as though her worth could be reclaimed by convenience alone. Eleanor felt the old instinct to shrink, to apologize for being an inconvenience, rise like an unwanted tide. But another feeling, newer and steadier, anchored her feet to the floor. She told Harold she would not be leaving with him. Her voice was quiet, but unshaken. The shock on his face was almost comical, but anger quickly replaced it. He reached for her arm, more out of habit than violence, as if he still believed he had the right to steer her life. Before his fingers could close around her sleeve, Tawa stepped forward, intercepting Harold's reach with one large hand. He did not grip or threaten. He simply placed his palm against Harold's wrist with a pressure that conveyed finality. Harold froze, stunned by the effortless strength holding him at bay. Tawa's voice, low and steady, rumbled through the room like distant thunder, telling him to step back. Humiliation flushed Harold's cheeks, but he withdrew, muttering curses that evaporated into the fire-lit air. He made one last attempt to coax Eleanor, softening his voice in a way that only made his insincerity clearer. She shook her head, her refusal firm and final. Harold's expression hardened into something brittle, and without another word, he stormed out into the white morning, the door slamming behind him like the end of a chapter she had never wished to write. Silence settled slowly after his departure, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant sigh of wind against the windows. Eleanor exhaled shakily, realizing her hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the lingering echo of standing her ground. Tawa remained where he was, watching her not with pride or triumph, but with a profound quietness, as though witnessing the unfurling of something sacred. He approached her slowly, giving her the choice to step away or remain. She did not move. Instead, she met his gaze with a vulnerability that felt both terrifying and necessary. He lifted her hand gently, helping her sit, ensuring her injured ankle was supported. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet brimmed with things unsaid, with gratitude and wonder and fear tangled together. Tawa finally broke the silence, telling her she had shown courage even he had not expected. His voice held no flattery, only truth, warm and grounding. Eleanor felt tears gathering, though not from pain. She confessed softly that she had spent years believing her worth faded with time, that she had grown accustomed to being overlooked, dismissed, or tolerated. Tawa knelt again, his height folding into humility. He told her age was not a diminishing but a deepening, that she carried storms within her that had never broken her spirit, and that he had seen her strength from the moment she stepped into the winter light. Eleanor felt something shift inside her, a breaking open, as if the long winter of her heart had finally allowed a single ray of sun to slip through. She reached for his hand, not seeking support this time but offering it. Their fingers intertwined gently, naturally. Outside, the storm clouds parted, revealing a pale stretch of sky. Tawa lowered his forehead to hers, breath warm against her lips, and whispered that if she chose him, he would spend his life proving love had no age.